this article was titled Intergroup Discrimination as a Predictor of Conflict Within the Same Organization, the Role of Organizational Identity. So the main questions that they wanted to look at were how perception of discrimination and perception of intergroup conflict are related, and what are the roles of intergroup identity and organizational identity in that context. So they did a study with 466 participants. They were all staff at a public university, and they asked them all to complete a questionnaire. So as you can see, the focus, this is their terminology of like administrative and services staff versus teachers, researchers, which I think generically is more just staff versus faculty. Was the main focus there. So they gave them a questionnaire that they rated scales on their perceived discrimination, intergroup conflict, and organizational and group identity. So questions like how much do you feel your identity is tied to your role as an administrative and services staff member? Do you feel that things are equal between you and teachers, researchers? Questions like those. So what they found, if you want to go to the next slide, Noah, after running that data and evaluating everything, is that if there's a perception of discrimination, it can lead to a perception of intergroup conflict. And intergroup identity acts as a mediator, since the perception of discrimination against your group would likely be the reason for perceived intergroup conflict. So if you feel that things are unequal or unbalanced, you're more likely to feel that there is some level of conflict going on between the groups as well. And your identity as part of a group explains the relationship there. But organizational identity also plays a role because it acts as a moderator for the relationship. So if you have a stronger shared identity that you're all part of the organization and that's your main focus, it kind of lessens the perception of the discrimination and it lessens the perception of the intergroup conflict. And so it can kind of help alleviate and reduce some of the conflict that might arise from those feelings. So overall, organizational conflict is likely to be greater when groups within the organization are formed and perceive certain groups as having better resources or being treated in different ways. And that there's, if there's a level of discrimination, working toward a shared organizational identity can help reduce this view of us versus them and help reduce conflict within the organization. And that was the main takeaway that that the researchers also came to, which is just that it's important for leaders to build a sense of a shared organizational identity and to focus less on various groups so that you can have a more cohesive organization overall.
So this is great. I mean, this is just one more piece of evidence of our intergroup contact theory sort of research. And I think it speaks to, Tony, like the identity to humanity training. It's like, how can we stop focusing so much on our differences and start focusing on our shared humanity, our shared organizational identity, because that's what helps bring people together and lead to less conflict or even perceived conflict.
I okay. Agree. It's more of that, but I still feel like you have to find a way to also acknowledge and to make people feel welcome and that the differences that they bring are valued, but that all of that coming in is what improves the overall organization. And like, your differences, your the unique things that you bring as an individual, and then also as a member of a certain group, we welcome that and we see the value in it, and it's what's going to make us as a whole better.
Yeah, I like, like Colleen uses this word like expanding the container, I think she says. And it's like, because sometimes the container is like, well, let's just focus on our different groups. But if you can expand it to go, our groups, yes, but also our individuality, our humanity, our organizational identity, like all of these different intersections of identity that we share, we have unique, acknowledging all of it. I think at least that's what the research seems to point to as a good way of going about it.
And one thing I thought was kind of important in this too was that it was based on your perception of conflict and not necessarily the reality of conflict. So I thought that was another interesting point, is how to ground people and you know, is there actual discrimination, or is it just your perception of what's happening, or conflict?
Yeah, and it's interesting how the intergroup identity was the mediator. So it really did help explain that link between perception of discrimination and perception of conflict. And so like the more you identified with your group, the more you seemed to perceive that there was conflict between groups. And then when it says the moderator, so I'm assuming that there was a negative correlation. So like in terms of organizational identity, so when organizational identity was introduced as a moderator, it actually modulated the perception of conflict downwards. Yeah.
Yeah. So where there was a greater sense that that you had a larger organizational identity, and that was a strong measure, then yeah, it showed that there was a less like a decline in the perceived conflict and discrimination.
Yeah.
Even if you held a group identity, it helped.
So yeah, so it should be our work to help companies build cultures where they both honor people's unique identities and also really try to foster a sense of shared organizational identity, team identity.